So she's a little bit under the weather. So, but anyway, so if you have your Bible, turn to Genesis chapter number 46. Genesis chapter 46. And we'll pick up where we left off last week. And actually, we're keep your Bible open this morning because we're going to be bouncing back and forth. Going to read a bunch this morning. In chapter number 46, verse number 1, it says, Israel took his journey, and with all that he had, and came to Beersheba, and offered sacrifice unto the God of his father Isaac. And God spake unto Israel in the visions of the night, and he said, Jacob, Jacob. And he said, Here am I. And he said, I am God, the God of thy father. Fear not to go down into Egypt, for I will there make of thee a great nation. I will go down with thee into Egypt, and I will also surely bring thee up again, and Joseph shall put his hand upon thine eyes. And we're going to stop reading right there this morning. And so obviously, just about everyone in here has been in here through most of the study through Joseph. But we know that here Joseph has, for those of you who haven't been in here, Joseph has revealed himself to his brethren, and Pharaoh has also got involved because he finds out that Joseph's father is still alive. And Joseph wants his father to come to Egypt because he said there's still going to be 5 more years of famine. They've been through 2 years of the famine, but there's 5 more years of famine that's going to occur. And so instead of Joseph continually sending provision up to Hebron where Jacob is living in the land of Canaan, and Joseph says, I want my father to come down here. And him and Pharaoh agree that they're going to give the land of Goshen to Jacob and to his offspring to live there. And so what we looked at last week was how that they sent the chariots and they sent the wagons and they showed up and they tell Jacob that Joseph is alive, and he faints. And he's there, but he doesn't come to until he sees the wagons. And when he sees all the wagons coming in with the provisions that they've made for him to come to Egypt, he realizes that his son is alive. And at the end of chapter number 45, it says, And Israel said, It is enough. Joseph, my son, is yet alive. I will go down and see him before I die. Now, you're going to see here that Jacob, it seems like, or Israel, and it's funny because Brother Tyrone brought this up about a month ago, and I do think about it often now, how that God, when Jacob wrestled with that angel at Peniel, he told him that he's changing his name from Jacob to Israel, but yet he interchangeably calls him. Sometimes he calls him Israel, sometimes he calls him Jacob, even after this. And so it's quite interesting as you kind of see it used, back and forth. But in this passage right here, here is Jacob, and he's about to make a move. And every time Jacob makes a move, we're going to look at it this morning, but every time that Jacob makes a move, as he makes a move, he has a meeting with God. Or God comes down and meets with him. We'll say it that way. But what I want us to look at a few things this morning. We'll start in Genesis chapter number 15. In Genesis chapter number 15, I just want us to look at one verse right here, because what you see. Let me read in verse number 3 of 46, and here's God speaking to Jacob, and he says, And he said, I am God, the God of thy father. Fear not to go down into Egypt. And so there was a fear that Jacob had. Now, that is one of the things that you will also see throughout Jacob's life is Jacob had many times as he's making a move, he's also making a move, but he's full of fear as he's making the move. And we'll look at it. We'll look at it today. But like I said, you're going to see that the first time Jacob makes a move is whenever Isaac and Rebekah tell him that he needs to go, and we know that he goes to Laban's house. But Isaac and Rebekah tell him to go, but he goes for fear of Esau. And then whenever the next time he makes a move is 20 some years later, he makes a move and he's leaving Laban's house. And Laban follows him, and he's fearful of that. But then also he knows that as he's going back, he's going to have to see Esau again. So he's fearful again. And so many times in Jacob's life, as he makes a move, he's fearful. And and sometimes God has to back you into a corner to get you to slow down, and get you to listen to him. And so what we're going to see is that happens throughout Jacob's life. But the first thing we're going to look at is in Genesis chapter 15, verse number 13. And here's a passage that no doubt Jacob had on his mind. In verse number 13, it says, "And he said unto Abram, Know of a surety that thy seed shall be a stranger in a land that is not theirs, and shall serve them, and they shall afflict them 400 years. And also that nation whom they shall serve will I judge, and afterward they shall come up out with great substance." And so here is God telling Abraham, or Abram at the time, he's telling Abram that Abram's offspring is going to go into a land, and they're going to be there for 400 years. And so Jacob has this in mind, and one of the things I thought about is how that God had put Jacob in the place where they were supposed to be. The place they were supposed to be is the land of Canaan, and Jacob is in the land of Canaan, and he's living in that promised land. But yet it was God's perfect will, and this sounds so strange, but it was God's perfect will to take Jacob out of that land and move him to the land of Egypt, and then cause the children of Israel to be in the land of Egypt for 400 years before he's going to bring them back out of that land and send them back to the land where Jacob had to leave. And it almost seems counterproductive or counterintuitive to say, well, they were already in the land, and Jacob had already established himself in the land. Why would God take him out of the place they're supposed to be and move them to another place? And so you see that it's, like I said, if you just think about it, it sounds strange. Thank you, Bob. And it is strange, but it was God's perfect will for that to happen. The next thing I want us to look at is in Genesis chapter number 21. In Genesis chapter number 21, we'll look in verse number 22, but what I want us to notice is in chapter 46, it says, "And Israel took his journey with all that he had and came to Beersheba." And Beersheba was not an unknown place to Jacob. Now we know, it seems like in Jacob's life, that most of the time when Jacob goes through Beersheba, when he's leaving to go to Laban and Pandan Aram, but as he goes through there, we know that he goes to Bethel, and Bethel is the place that 2 different times God met with Jacob. And so, but Jacob was familiar with Beersheba. And so sometimes it doesn't hurt you in your life to go back to a place that you are familiar with. And so here, Abraham, in Genesis chapter number 21, in verse number 22, it says, "And it came to pass at that time that Abimelech and Phicol, the chief captain of his host, spake unto Abraham, saying, God is with thee in all that thou doest. Now therefore swear unto me here by God that thou wilt not deal falsely with me, nor with my son, nor with my son's son, but according to the kindness that I have done unto thee, thou shalt do unto me, and to the land wherein thou hast sojourned. And Abraham said, I will swear. And so now here, Abraham and Abimelech are making a covenant. Now, if in the previous verses, Sarah has had Isaac, and Sarah says that she wants Hagar and Ishmael to go, and so she sends off Ishmael and Hagar, and she sends them off. And so in the previous chapter before that was where Abraham had went to the land, the Philistines' land, where Abimelech was, and this was one of the times that Abraham denied that Sarah was his wife and said it was his sister, and God stopped Abimelech from doing anything with Sarah. And so they had this relationship, but Abimelech realizes that God is with Abraham. And so in chapter number 21, here they make this covenant. In the few verses between what I read and what I'm about to read, they have a disagreement over a well. But in verse number 30, it says, and he said, for these 7 ewe lambs shalt thou take of my hand, that they may be a witness unto me that I have digged this well. Wherefore he called that place Beersheba, because and the name means the well of the oath, and because there they swear both of them. Thus they made a covenant at Beersheba. Then Abimelech rose up and called the chief captain of his host, and they returned into the land of the Philistines. And Abraham planted a grove in Beersheba, and called there on the name of the Lord, the everlasting God. And Abraham sojourned in the Philistines' land many days. And so here, Abraham makes this covenant with Abimelech, and when they make this covenant, Abraham sets up. He has a well there, and he sets up this grove. He plants these trees, and basically he leaves his mark in Beersheba. So now, if you get to Genesis chapter number 26, I want us to notice in verse number 1. It says, and there was a famine in the land. Now, does this not sound familiar? Each one of the patriarchs had a famine in the land. When the famine came, Abraham was able to go to, God allowed Abraham to go to Egypt, which we know that it didn't necessarily turn out great for Abraham when he went to Egypt. Because he had some issues down there, but also his issues, he had Lot with him, and Lot got a taste of the life in Egypt, and that's probably one of the things whenever it came time for Abraham and Lot to separate, while Lot looked at that well-watered plain of Jordan, but he pitched his tent toward Sodom because he got a taste of what that life was like in Egypt. And so now here in chapter number 26, here is Isaac's turn for a famine to come in the land. And in verse number 1 says, there was a famine in the land besides the first famine that was in the days of Abraham. And Isaac went unto Abimelech, king of the Philistines, unto Gerar. And the Lord appeared unto him and said, go not down into Egypt. Dwell in the land which I shall tell thee of. Sojourn in this land, and I will be with thee. So I'm gonna stop for just a second right there. So now here we have, again, like I said, first we had Abraham, who had a famine in his day, and God allowed him to make a choice, and he went to Egypt during that time. But now here we have Isaac, and Isaac begins to look for, he begins to go somewhere where there's food. And so he stops here in the Philistines' land, where Abimelech is, who his father had made a covenant. And if you remember from what I read, from their covenant, it was Abimelech and his sons and his sons' sons. And so they made a covenant between them that said, hey, we're going to make this covenant so that whether it's me or whether my son or my grandson or you or your son, that we're gonna establish this covenant, and we're going to be friends. And so now here, Isaac goes down, and it's unfortunate because a lot of times you see a father face something and the son face something, and then you're going to see that Jacob faces it also, and sometimes it's a shame that the son doesn't learn from the father's mistake. You're going to see that Isaac does the same thing that Abraham did, which I didn't read it, but I explained to you about it from the previous chapter, how that Abraham said Sarah was his sister, and you're going to see that Isaac also basically says that Rebekah is not his wife. And so a lot of times the father's going to face something and the son is going to face something, and if the son doesn't learn from the father's mistakes, he's going to repeat the father's mistakes. And so, but in this passage right here, we have God stopping him from going into Egypt. Now, you can speculate all you want to as to why God stopped Isaac from going in Egypt, but God says, hey, I don't want you to go down to Egypt. Yes, there may be food in Egypt. Yes, and sometimes, I was looking out this morning. I was looking out this morning when I was dropping my mother-in-law off, and the mule or whatever that was out there had its head under the fence, and it was eating the grass on the other side of the fence. And we've all heard it said many times how the grass is not greener on the other side of the fence. But if you've ever watched animals, for whatever reason, they'll stick their head through the fence. It's the same grass. It's not any different. It's not any different color. I haven't really ate much grass in my life. I've ate some. If you rode four-wheelers or played any kind of sports or something, you probably ate a little grass and dirt in your life. But anyway, as far as I know, the grass doesn't taste any different when it's on the other side of the fence. But for whatever reason, an animal loves to stick its head through a fence. Even when it's a barbed wire fence, it'll stick its head through that fence and it'll eat the grass on the other side of the fence. And you see it, and it's just in their nature. It's just in their nature to do it. And sometimes it's in our human nature to always be looking on the other side of the fence, whether it's a job that you have and you have a good job and your job's paying your bills and you're doing quite well. So I've got a buddy. Actually, when I started at Kaiser, which was 25 years ago, when I started at Kaiser, he worked at Kaiser, and we worked together for about 2 years. Jake, and he wanted to go into sales, and the branch manager didn't want him to go in sales, so he ended up leaving, and then he ended up going to Ingersoll Rand, which is our competition. And he worked for Ingersoll Rand for a while, and he lived in Charlotte, and then he moved back to Atlanta, and then he moved out to Texas, and we kept in touch, and we've talked back and forth. Well, about a year ago, he called me and said, hey, I'm thinking about coming back to Kaiser. I've got this opportunity. I'm going to come back to Kaiser. I'm like, okay, great. And so, but the problem is he's a mover. And if you ever get one of these guys that's a mover, they're just a mover. And so I got his buddy, Jake Rodney Coffee. I got his buddy hired in as a salesman for us, and Rodney loves it. And him and my buddy talk, and I talked to him a little bit, and he's like so excited. He's like, I'm finally back. I've always wanted to be back at Kaiser. I love the product. It's the best air compressor on the market. Blah blah blah. Brother Wayne, I mean, it was, he's like, I've always wanted to be back. I would have never left had Doug not, had Doug let me be a salesman, I would have never left, and it sounded wonderful. And so he took the sales manager's position out in Houston, and everything, as far as I knew, was going great. And then we had a meeting there. A few weeks ago, and I mentioned him, and Rodney come over to me and said, "Hey, by the way, Jeremy's not with us anymore." I'm like, "What?" He's like, "Yeah, he took another job. Someone come and made him an offer, and he took another job." And Brother Tyrone, he's just a mover. I know Brother Tyrone. I think Brother Tyrone's this way. If he finds a job, he's happy, and I'm just happy. I just do my job. But other people, they're just movers. They're never satisfied, and they're always looking, and they're always looking for the next opportunity. And it may not make them better, but they just feel good for a little while because they're moving. And so that's my buddy. And so some people are just movers. And here's Isaac, and he had to move. He didn't necessarily want to move, but he had to move because of the famine. But here God comes to him and says, "Hey, do not go down to Egypt. Dwell in the land which I shall tell thee of." In verse 3 it says, "Sojourn in this land, and I will be with thee. And I will bless thee, for unto thee and unto thy seed, and I will give all these countries, and I will also perform the oath which I swear unto Abraham thy father. And I will make thy seed to multiply as the stars of heaven, and will give unto thy seed all these countries, and in thy seed shall all the nations of the earth be blessed, because that Abraham obeyed my voice, and kept my charge, my commandments, my statutes, and my laws, and Isaac dwelt in Gerar." And so you see right here that here God renews his promise to Isaac. He renews his promise to Isaac. And so he dwells in the land. But after he dwells there for a little while, and I'm not going to read the whole passage, but after he dwells there for a little while, that God begins to bless him. And as God begins to bless him, the people of the land get jealous. In verse number, I skipped the verses where that Abimelech has to tell the men of the land that Rebekah is not his sister, but it's his wife, and that they need to leave her alone. But in verse number 12 it says, "Then Isaac sowed in that land, and received in the same year 100-fold. And the Lord blessed him." Now, I'm just going to tell you, I know Luke's in business, and Frank's a numbers guy, but anyone, Paul's in business, but anyone here that's in business, anyone would take that deal. If I said, "Hey, if you're gonna invest $1, you invest $1, you're going to get $100 back." You think it was too good to be true. But if you invest $1 and get $2 back, to me that's a good thing. If you invest $1 and get $4 back, that's a good thing. But if you invest $1 and get $100 back, that's a pretty good thing. And so here God is showing Isaac that he's going to take care of him, and so he sows. And when he sows one seed, and he gets 100 in return. In verse 13 it says, "And the man waxed great, and went forward and grew until he became very great." So here is God. God promised him. He said, "Hey, if you don't go where you want to go, if you go where I tell you to go, then I'm going to bless you. I'm going to make the same promise to you that I made to your father, as long as you obey my voice." And so here Isaac obeys, and Isaac was not perfect. It's funny because sometimes these people, they end up in the hall of faith, but yet there are other instances, again, in the issue with Abraham and his wife, and Isaac and his wife, where they were weak in faith. Instead of just saying, "Hey, she's my wife," if you can trust God that God is going to bless you, and God is going to multiply your seed, and God is going to take care of you, surely to goodness you could trust God to say, "Hey, she's my wife," and I can say she's my wife, and people aren't going to kill me to take my woman away from me. But neither Abraham or Isaac both of them had an issue with that, and neither of them had enough faith, and God had to protect them, even though both of them lied. And I know that Abraham said, well, kind of, she sort of is, but whatever, it was still a lie. And so here we have him waxing great, and he becomes so great that in verse 14 it says, for he had possession of flocks, possession of herds, and great stores of servants, and the Philistines envied him. For all the wells which his father's servants had digged in the days of Abraham, the Philistines had stopped them and filled them with earth. Now that just doesn't make any. Again, a lot of things when you read don't make. If there's a well, why would you plug up a well? Why would you stop a well? I mean, even if someone else is using that water, you can use that water too. It makes no sense to me why they plugged up those wells. But what happens here, and I'm not gonna read all the verses, but what happens here is basically they start pushing Isaac out. They start pushing Isaac out, and as they push him out, and he goes to a well, and they dispute that well, and so he goes to another place, and they dispute that well, and he goes to another place. And so in verse 23, it says he went up from thence to Beersheba. Now, Beersheba is a place where his father planted a grove. In verse 24, it says, the Lord appeared unto him the same night, and said, I am the God of Abraham thy father. Fear not, for I am with thee, and will bless thee, and multiply thy seed for my servant's sake. And he builded an altar there, and called upon the name of the Lord, and pitched his tent there, and there Isaac's servants digged a well. And in verse number, so in those verses right there, here again, he comes to this place that his father had been, and he gets to this place, and no doubt it's been many years. If you plant a tree, if you plant a grove of trees and you come back many years later, now instead of just a little bit, just a few little trees, now they're big trees. And he comes to this place and he recognizes this place as a place that his father had been, and God meets with him there. And so he builds an altar there, and he digs a well there. And so then in verse number 26, then Abimelech went to him from Gerar, and Ahuzzath, one of his friends, and Phicol, the chief captain of his army. Now, Phicol at least was with Abimelech whenever they made the covenant with Abraham. And Isaac said unto them, wherefore come ye to me, seeing ye hate me, and have sent me away from you? And they said, we saw certainly that the Lord was with thee. And we said, let therefore be now an oath betwixt us, even betwixt us and thee, and let us make a covenant with thee, that thou wilt do us no hurt, as we have not touched thee, and as we have done unto thee nothing but good, and have sent thee away in peace. Thou art now the blessed of the Lord. And he made them a feast, and they did eat and drink. And they rose up betimes in the morning, and sware one to another, and Isaac sent them away, and they departed from him in peace. Verse 32, and it came to pass the same day that Isaac's servants came and told him concerning the well which they had digged, and said unto him, we have found water. And he called it Sheba, an oath. Therefore the name of the city is called Beersheba, again, the well of the oath, unto this day. And so here is a place that now Abraham has been, and Abraham called it Beersheba as well, because he said it's the well of the oath. And now here Isaac comes and he digs a well, and they find water, and so now there is a grove. There is trees planted, there is an altar, and there is a well here. So now, whenever we get to chapter number 28, here is Jacob, and Jacob is leaving. In verse number 6, it says, and when Esau saw that Isaac had blessed Jacob and sent him away to Padan Aram to take him a wife from thence, and that he blessed him, he gave him charge, saying, Thou shalt not take a wife of the daughters of Canaan. And that Jacob obeyed the voice of his father and mother and was gone to Padan Aram. And so here Esau sees that Jacob has left, and you get to verse number 10, and Jacob went out from Beersheba. And so he goes, the first place that he goes is to Beersheba, and it's a place that he knew because it's a place that his grandfather had been, and it's a place that his father had been, and it's a place that he recognized as a place where these trees had been planted by his grandfather, and where an altar had been resurrected by his father, or been set up by his father, and where a well was there. And so he goes to that place and goes out from that place. And so it is a place that Jacob is used to. In chapter number 31, in verse number 3, it says, and now here Jacob he's been in the land with Laban, and he's got his wives and he's got his sons, all of them of Benjamin, and we have here where God is going to tell him it's time to go. In verse number 3, it says, And the Lord said unto Jacob, Return unto the land of thy fathers, to thy kindred, and I will be with thee. And so now here's God saying, hey, it's time to go. It's time to go. And you get over to chapter number 32. Chapter number 32 and verse number 6. And here is Jacob again, and it says, And the messengers returned to Jacob, saying, We came to thy brother Esau, and also he cometh to meet thee, and 400 men with him. So this is what I was talking about earlier, how that each time, and I didn't read the passage where God, after Jacob went through Beersheba, because I'm trying to cut off a little time here, but I didn't read the passage where after Jacob goes through Beersheba, where that God meets with him in Bethel, and he speaks to him, and he promises him the same promises that he promised Abraham, and the same promise that he promises Isaac, he promises to Jacob. And so in this passage right here that we just read, here's Jacob, and he's going out again, and he's having to move again. He's having to leave a place, and obviously I haven't moved a lot in my life. I just moved one time, but some people have moved multiple times, and it's a fearful thing to pick up and take everything you got and move to another place. But if God is the one that's telling you to go, then it'd be a fearful thing to stay. It'd be a fearful thing to stay. If God's telling you, hey, you need to go, it'd be a fearful thing to stay, even though you're familiar with the people and familiar with it. But yet God also made it so that Jacob felt like he needed to move because of Laban and Laban's sons and how they were treating him. And so here is Jacob, and in verse number 7, then Jacob was greatly afraid and distressed, and he divided the people that was with him and the flocks and herds and camels into two bands. And so here he is. If you remember, I read it in chapter number 46, that God tells him not to fear. In Jacob's life, many times in Jacob's life, he was fearful. I mentioned it after. Say what you want to about it. I mean, basically, he stole the blessing from Esau. I mean, it was him and his mom come up with a scheme. Isaac wanted to bless Esau, and we know that Esau he despised his birthright, and he basically sold his birthright to Jacob for that basically bowl of pottage. But the blessing, Isaac was still willing to give the blessing to Esau. And Jacob is going to steal it, and it was God's will for Jacob to have it, but maybe not exactly how he took it, but yet that's how it worked out. And so Jacob steals the blessing from Esau, and Esau, if nothing, he was a man. He was a man's man. He was a hunter, and Jacob was more. He was more of a trickster and a schemer and a conniver. And so when Esau was angry, Jacob realized he was not man enough to whip him face to face. And so Isaac understood that, and Rebekah understood that, and they said, "I tell you what, you need to go. You need to go until Esau's wrath, until he calms down. You need to get out of here." So each time Jacob makes a move, there is a reason for him to fear. There's a reason for him to fear. So here we have him when he leaves Isaac and Rebekah's house. He's fearful. Now he's leaving. He's left Laban, and he's returning, and he's going to have to face Esau. And he's fearful to see Esau again, even after all these years. And it's one of the things I mentioned when I talked about Jacob, and I talked about Jacob's sons. Joseph was the only son that understood how to forgive and forget. Those other boys didn't understand how to forgive and forget. And Jacob said, "If I were Esau, I would not forgive me for what I did." So when it was time for him to return, he was fearful, because he said, "Even though it's been probably 20 years, I'm still fearful of what's going to happen when I see Esau." And when the messengers come back and say, "Esau's coming and he's got 400 men with him," Jacob said, "Oh, he's coming after me to kill me." And so in this passage right here, in verse number 8, it says, "And said, if Esau come to the one company and smite it, then the other company which is left shall escape." And so here's Jacob still being a trickster, still being a conniver, still trying to figure this out. And Jacob said, "O God of my father Abraham, and God of my father Isaac, the Lord, which saidest unto me, return unto thy country and to thy kindred, and I will deal with thee. I am not worthy of the least of all the mercies and of all the truth which thou hast showed unto thy servant, for with my staff I passed over this Jordan, and now I am become two bands. Deliver me, I pray thee, from the hand of my brother, from the hand of Esau, for I fear him, lest he will come and smite me and the mother with the children. And thou saidest, I will surely do thee good, and make thy seed as the sand of the sea, which cannot be numbered for multitude." And so here's Jacob, and he's praying to God, and he's like, "God, you're the one that told me that I needed to leave Laban's house. You're the one that told me I needed to return, and you're the one that promised me. And I'm going to acknowledge, God, that I'm not worthy of any of the blessings that you've done for me. And I'm going to acknowledge, God, that I'm not worthy of any of the mercies that you've given me. But even though I'm acknowledging that I'm not worthy of them, it doesn't mean I'm not going to ask for them." And I'm asking for them now because I'm fearful, because I'm going to have to face Esau again. In verse number 24, of this chapter, we have here, it says, "And Jacob was left alone, and there wrestled a man with him until the breaking of the day. And when he saw that he prevailed not against him, he touched the hollow of his thigh, and the hollow of Jacob's thigh was out of joint, and he wrestled with it, as he wrestled with him. And he said, Let me go, for the day breaketh. And he said, I will not let thee go, except thou bless me. And he said unto him, What is thy name? And he said, Jacob. And he said, Thy name shall be called no more Jacob, but Israel, for as a prince hast thou power with God and with men, and hast prevailed. And Jacob asked him and said, Tell me, I pray thee, thy name. And he said, Wherefore is it that thou dost ask my name? And he blessed him there. And Jacob called the name of the place Peniel, for I have seen God face to face, and my life is preserved. And he passed over Peniel, And as he passed over Penuel, the sun rose upon him, and he halted upon his thigh. So here is Jacob, and each time he has to move, that God is going to come to him, and God is going to speak with him, and God is going to calm his fears. And so here's another time that he's fearful. He's fearful that he's going to meet his brother Esau, and yet here God comes to him again, and they wrestle all night, and God changes his name here. He changes his name, and so in chapter number 35, verse number 1. It says, and God said unto Jacob, arise, go up to Bethel, and dwell there, and make there an altar unto God that appeared unto thee when thou fleddest from thy face of thy brother, from thy brother. Then Jacob said unto his household and to all that were with him, put away the strange gods that are among you. Be clean and change your garments. And we know what they're going to say. And I'm going to skip down right here to verse number 6. So Jacob came to Luz, which is in the land of Canaan, that is Bethel, he and all the people that were with him. And he built there an altar and called the place El Bethel, because there God appeared unto him when he fled from the face of his brother. But Deborah, Rebekah's nurse, died, and she was buried beneath Bethel under an oak. And the name of it was called Elon Bakuth. And God appeared unto Jacob again when he came out of Pandan Aram, and blessed him. And God said unto him, thy name is Jacob. Thy name shall not be called any more Jacob, but Israel shall be thy name. And he called his name Israel. And God said unto him, I am God Almighty. Be fruitful and multiply. A nation and a company of nations shall be out of thee, and kings shall come out of thy loins. And the land which I gave Abraham and Isaac, to thee I will give it, and to thy seed after thee, and will I give the land. And so right here, God has made him a promise that he's going to give him this land that he's in. And so when you get to chapter number 46, back to chapter number 46, and I'll just read the verses again. And Israel took his journey with all that he had, and came to Beersheba, and offered sacrifices unto God of his father Isaac. And so he stops at this place again. And so there's a grove there, there's trees there, and there's an altar there, and there's a well there. And Jacob stops at this place, and he offers these sacrifices. And he's offering these sacrifices because he's fearful. He says, in his heart, he's saying, I so want to see my son Joseph. I'm 130 years old. And we know that he felt like he was going to die at any moment, but he's going to live 17 more years. But yet he says, I want to go see my son Joseph, but God promised me this land. God promised me this land, and he promised my seed this land. And I don't understand why, if God promised me this land, why am I going to that land? A land that God told my father not to go to. And so I don't understand. So in verse 2, it says, and God spake unto Israel in the visions of the night, and said, Jacob, Jacob. And he said, here am I. And he said that because he'd heard the voice of God. Not one time, but more than one time. He'd heard the voice of God, and God had came to him in just this manner and spoke to him in just this manner. And so when God speaks to him this time, it was the voice that he was longing to hear. It was the voice that he needed to hear. It was the voice that could calm his fears. And he said, I am God, the God of thy father. Fear not to go down into Egypt, for I will there make of thee a great nation. I will go down with thee unto Egypt, and I will also surely bring thee up again. And Joseph shall put his hand upon thine eyes. And Jacob rose up from Beersheba, and the sons of Israel carried Jacob their father, and their little ones, and their wives in the wagons which Pharaoh had sent to carry him. And so Jacob heard the voice of God. And when he heard the voice of God say, fear not to go down, Jacob said, all right, boys, let's get in the wagon and let's go. Riley, that's all he was looking for. He's fearful. He's 130 years old. And he said, I don't want to make this journey. If I go down here, and yes, I want to see Joseph. Yes, it's important for me to see Joseph, but if God is not going to go with me, and God doesn't have something for me there, I don't want to go. And God said, hey, I have something for you. I have a plan, even though that plan means 400 years of Jacob's offspring living in Egypt, but I will bring you up again. And that's all Jacob needed to hear was the voice of God. Thank you.